Hello and a very warm welcome to Political Economy with Shweta Punj. India has finally signed its free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. This free trade agreement was in the works for several years. What is exactly a free trade agreement and how does it impact India and Indians? Well, that's what we're going to try and decode today. To give you some perspective, India's free trade agreement with the United Kingdom is being considered historic for several reasons. Firstly, it's the first major trade agreement with a Western country. We've had free trade agreements with Western countries in the past as well. One is with Switzerland and the other with Norway, which was signed in March of 2024, and they will be implemented in October this year, but they weren't of the scale of the free trade agreement between UK and India. Now, free trade agreement, as the term implies, means free movement of goods and services, right? And the hope is that this will double the trade between the two countries to $120 billion in the next 5 years. So, what are we really talking about here? We are talking about Indian factories churning out goods to be shipped to the United Kingdom. And why will those Indian goods have a competitive advantage? Because of the free trade agreement, which means that now they will have to pay 0% tariff, which is different from what it was until now. It is being considered a historic milestone in bilateral economic ties between the two countries. Significantly, it brings down tariffs to zero for a host of employment intensive sectors for India, such as textiles, jewelry, leather, machinery, auto parts, pharmaceuticals, processed foods, marine products, and so on. In return, India has given market access for UK companies in liquor and automobiles. You must have read stories about how Scotch will become cheaper and British auto companies can send now their cars to India, their automobiles to India at a lower custom duty as against what they were paying earlier. But the free trade agreement, of course, the negotiations were challenging. It required a lot of groundwork. However, now the challenge lies in the implementation of this agreement. Firstly, the UK Parliament will have to approve the FTA before it takes effect, which could take up to a year. In India's free trade agreements journey, this is a big milestone because this journey began with SAARC countries, which is the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, followed by the Eastern Bloc countries and then Australia. So India has completed trade agreements with all Eastern Bloc countries except China. So the move towards the western part of the world was natural progression in India's growth trajectory. It is something that India had been working on for a very long time. However, there's a fundamental difference between the Eastern Bloc and Western countries. India's earlier FTAs with the rest of the world, which is the Eastern Bloc, were focused largely on market access. They were trade centric. So they were around lower tariffs, they were around opening up of markets for Indian goods, and so on. However, Western FTAs, like the one with UK, will include trade access, but will also include what India considers as non-core subjects. Western countries push us to deal with issues like labor, environment, gender, intellectual property issues, and India has not dealt with such subjects in the past. Western countries consider these as essential subjects, and they want partner countries to harmonize their regulations with Western regulations. In fact, UK is the first trade agreement in which India had to negotiate gender. These are very essential subjects for Western countries, while for India, they are considered as non-core subjects. The non-core subjects, however, can have significant implications on goods and services a country is able to export or import. Let me give you an example. The United States Mexico Canada Agreement, which replaced NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement, on July 1st, 2020, includes provisions for minimum wages in the agreement, especially in the automotive industry. The agreement mandates a certain percentage of vehicle parts must originate from North America, and the people involved in the assembly of those vehicles that are being sent to the United States should be paid at least $16 an hour, which is nearly double the minimum wage in Mexico. And this is just one example. So there are hundreds of such clauses that are hidden in gender, sustainability, labor. And that's why India will really have to now take a step back and work on pushing through these very crucial reforms. Now, textile and apparel exports, for instance, they are getting a 0% tariff now from the current 4 to 16%, which gives India competitive advantage as against its competition countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam. But we have to remember that UK is also a high per capita income country, which would mean that there will be greater emphasis on high-end quality products. So India will really have to work on catering to that demand. Now, let me give you an example where, lower tariffs have not necessarily translated into higher exports from India. Now, the India-Japan FTA signed in 2011. It lowered tariffs on textiles to zero, but India's contribution to Japan's textile imports is just 1% at the moment, at $234.5 million. This despite tariffs being lowered from about 10% to zero in the last 14 years. The growth in textile exports to Japan has been almost nil. Well, so evidently tariffs aren't just enough to boost exports. Now India will have to deliver on high-end products for a very discerning market. Secondly, opening up of the auto sector also sets the stage for future negotiations that India is in the middle of with the United States and the European Union. Japan and South Korea, who have been investing in the Indian auto sector, could also ask for greater access to the Indian market. And we can expect the United States and the EU also to come back to India asking for greater access to the Indian automobile market, which has been fairly protected, and it has led to exponential growth of the Indian automobile sector. So this could actually mark the beginning of the opening up of the Indian automotive industry. But are we getting back something in return? Yes, we are getting access to the UK markets at lower rates, but we have also opened up our auto sector for imports from the UK. Undoubtedly, the FTA promises tremendous opportunity, but there is a fine print which could be the trigger India needs to fulfill its ambition and potential as a manufacturing nation. So clearly, the task is cut out for India. It will have to step up to take advantage of the India-UK FTA, the enormous opportunity that it presents itself. But India has to be ready in terms of churning out high-quality products, very, very important, and bring in labor reforms, gender representation, and so on, which its Western partner is going to insist on. Do leave me your comments and feedback in the comments section below. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.